The helicopter's rotors slowed down as we landed on the helipad. After 3 hours of choppy air above the Gulf of Mexico, my legs felt shaky when I got out. The offshore platform spread out in front of me, a huge industrial complex sticking up from the water. In my 15 years working oil rigs, I'd never seen anything this big. It covered a massive area, easily triple the size of normal operations. I grabbed my duffel and walked toward what looked like a processing station. 2 men with assault rifles blocked my way. Their faces were blank, professional. The guns weren't just for show. ID and authorization, the taller one said, hand extended. I pulled out my credentials and transfer papers. Thomas Wilson, new senior drilling engineer. The guard checked my documents with a handheld device, then studied my face, matching it against whatever appeared on his screen. His partner kept his eyes on the horizon, not on me. Strange. On most rigs, security focused on potential threats coming aboard, not watching the surrounding waters. "Clear," the first guard finally said, handing back my papers. "Follow the yellow line to processing." I followed the yellow line painted on the deck through halls full of keycard scanners and security cameras at every corner. Pretty strange for an oil rig. The place looked more like some high-security lab or military base. Steel doors with different clearance levels were all over, many with signs saying, "Authorized personnel only." At processing, a woman sat behind bulletproof glass. She took my fingerprints and scanned my eyes before giving me a key card without looking at me. "Level 2 clearance," she said. "Don't try doors marked 3 or higher." I nodded and took the card. "Who do I report to?" "Foreman Robert Kendrick, East Wing, Operations." She pointed down another corridor. "Yellow line." Robert turned out to be a tough-looking man in his mid-40s with short gray hair and the straight back of someone with military background. He barely looked up from his tablet when I walked into his office. "Wilson," he said, not a question. "Your credentials are impressive. Palmer Rigs, North Sea, Kazakhstan. Why'd you take this posting?" The question caught me off guard. Most foremen didn't care why you took an assignment, only that you could do the job. "Triple the pay of my last contract," I answered honestly. "And curiosity. Not many details in the job description except specialized extraction techniques." Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. "We value discretion here. Your contract has an extensive non-disclosure agreement for a reason." He looked back at his tablet. "You'll bunk with James Chen. Been here 3 years. He'll show you around living quarters. Tomorrow at 0600, you'll get your full briefing and assignment. Questions?" "What exactly are we drilling for out here?" I asked, testing the waters. Robert looked up, his face expressionless. "Oil, Wilson. What else would we be drilling for?" Something in his tone told me not to push further. Not yet, anyway. "No other questions, sir." "Good. James will be in the mess hall. East Wing, 3rd level." I followed more yellow lines to the mess hall, a modern space with real windows facing the ocean. Most offshore places I'd worked on had hardly any windows, but this one had a whole wall of glass. The food smelled better than any rig I'd been on, too. The mess hall was about half full, maybe 30 people eating dinner. I took a tray of what looked like real steak and vegetables, not the usual rehydrated meals, and looked around the room. "You must be Wilson," a voice said from behind. I turned to find a man in his early 30s with careful eyes. He wore the same company uniform as everyone else, but carried himself differently. Watchful, sizing everyone up. "James Chen," he said, extending his hand. "I'm your bunkmate." His handshake was firm but brief, almost reluctant. He gestured to an empty table away from the others. "How long have you been in oil?" he asked as we sat. 15 years, I said. "Started roughnecking out of college and worked my way up. You?" 5 years here, 2 at other locations." His answers were clipped, efficient. "I work the Eastern platform mostly, technical systems." I took a bite of the steak. It was perfectly cooked, restaurant quality. Food's better than any rig I've been on. James nodded. Company believes in keeping people comfortable. Contracts are long. 8 months on, 1 month off. That was unusual. Standard rotations were 2 to 4 weeks on, equal time off. 8 months was almost prison-like. 2 men approached our table. The older one nodded at James. "This the new engineer?" he asked. James nodded. "Thomas Wilson, meet Michael Reeves and David Cohen. Michael runs production floor 2, David's senior technician." Michael looked about mid-30s and carried himself like he totally owned the place. David seemed a bit older, maybe late 30s, with sharp eyes that caught everything. "Welcome aboard," Michael said, sitting down. "How was the flight in?" "Long," I answered. "Got to see a lot of empty ocean." "You get used to the isolation," David said, picking at his food. His eyes kept darting to James, then back to his plate. "So what are the production numbers like?" I asked casually. The briefing materials were light on details. Michael and David exchanged a quick glance. Something passed between them. A warning, maybe. "Standard deep water extraction," Michael said carefully. "You'll get the full specs tomorrow." "We're hitting targets," David added. "That's the main thing." I tried another angle. "What about the drilling depth? Are we talking standard or ultra deep?" The table went quiet. Even James seemed to tense up beside me. "All operational details are covered in the morning briefing," David said finally. His tone was polite but firm. Conversation closed. The rest of dinner was just small talk about Houston sports teams and how good the satellite TV reception was. Whenever I tried to talk about specifics about the rig or its operations, they got really vague or just changed the subject. These men were hiding something, and they weren't even trying to be subtle about it. After dinner, James showed me to our quarters. The room was bigger than standard rig rooms. 2 decent beds, a small sitting area, private bathroom with actual water pressure. Like the mess hall, our room had a window. This one faced west, showing the horizon where the sun was setting over the ocean. "Lights out is recommended at 2200, James said, "but not mandatory. Just don't make noise if you stay up." He pointed to a wall panel. "That's the communication system. Blue button for general announcements, red for emergencies. Don't touch the black button." "What's the black button for?" I asked. "You don't have clearance to know," he replied without hesitation. "So don't touch it." James picked the bed farthest from the door and pulled out a tablet. Our conversation was clearly over. I unpacked my bag, put away my stuff, and took a shower. When I came out, James looked like he was sleeping, with his back to the room. I lay on my bed but couldn't fall asleep. The rig's sounds felt wrong. I'd been on enough offshore platforms to know their normal sounds. The metal creaking, the distant noise of generators, the steady sound of waves hitting the supports. This place had all those, but underneath was something else. A rhythm that seemed to come from way below. Not machine-like, it was slow and steady. I got up and went to the window. The night had no moon, with just the rig's lights breaking up the dark ocean, but the water looked weird. The bright lights on the platform should have made the waves glow, but instead, the water just took in all the light. It didn't bounce back. It just soaked it up, making a circle of darkness around the rig. As I watched, the pulsing sound got louder. Not just in my head. Something under us, deep below the ocean floor. Something big. I moved closer to the glass, trying to figure out what was wrong with the darkness. For a second, I thought I saw something move in the water. Not waves, but something solid moving with purpose. Then it disappeared. Behind me, James's voice cut through the quiet. "Don't look at the water for too long." So he wasn't sleeping. "It's against rig protocols." I turned from the window. "Why?" In the dim light, I saw him sitting up in bed. "You should get some sleep. Morning briefing comes early. You'll need to stay sharp." He turned to face the wall again, and I went back to my bed. I kept my eyes open in the darkness, listening to that weird rhythm from below, wondering what was really going on here, and why nobody wanted to talk about it. I barely slept that night. The weird pulsing from below kept me awake, along with the dark water I'd seen. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that circle of darkness around the rig that didn't reflect any light. James didn't say another word after warning me not to look at the water too long, and I didn't push. When my alarm went off at 5:30, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. James was already up, dressed, and sitting on the edge of his bed, waiting. "You look like crap," he said. "Thanks." I rubbed my face. "Is the coffee any good here at least?" "Better than you'd expect. Grab it on the way to the briefing." I showered quickly, trying to wash away the fog in my brain. The water pressure was surprisingly strong. As I dressed in the company-issued uniform, I caught James watching me in the mirror. "What?" I asked. "Nothing. Let's go. Robert doesn't like late." The mess hall was busy with the morning shift grabbing breakfast. I filled a large thermos with coffee that smelled better than anything I'd had offshore before. James led me through a series of corridors to a large conference room where about 20 people were already seated. Robert stood at the front, scrolling through a tablet. He looked up when we entered, checking his watch pointedly. 5 minutes, he said to the room. I found an empty seat next to Michael, who nodded in greeting. The coffee tasted as good as it smelled, rich and strong. As I took another sip, Robert put down his tablet and faced the room. "Morning briefing," he announced without preamble. "Before assignments, a reminder of our unique operational parameters." He pushed a button, and the lights dimmed. A digital display showed up on the wall behind him, with a cross-section of the rig and the ocean beneath. "For our newest team member," Robert continued, looking at me, "and as a refresher for everyone else, this installation exists in what the company designates a pocket of exception. Standard physics behaves unpredictably here. That's why we have protocols beyond typical offshore safety measures." My tiredness went away. In 15 years of oil work, I'd never heard anything like this. Michael must have seen my reaction because he gave me a small shake of his head, a warning to keep quiet. Robert tapped his screen, and the display changed to show a list of rules. Rule 1. No extended observation of the surrounding waters. 30 seconds maximum. This isn't superstition. It's based on documented incidents. He went down the list. Rule 2. No physical contact with the water. If you drop something overboard, report it. Do not attempt retrieval. Rule 3. Maintain constant radio communication during any outdoor work. If communication drops for more than 60 seconds, emergency protocols activate automatically. Rule 4. Report any unusual sightings immediately. Do not investigate yourself. David raised his hand from across the table. "Sir, about Rule 4. What counts as unusual sightings?" Robert's face got tense. "You know company policy on specifics, Cohen. If you see something that doesn't belong on an oil rig or in the Gulf of Mexico, report it." The non-answer hung in the air. I looked around the room, watching faces. Nobody seemed surprised by Robert's vague response. These people knew something they weren't saying. "Moving to today's assignments," Robert continued. "Wilson, you're with Reeves on Production Floor East. He'll show you our systems. Chen, you're on Monitoring Station 3. Cohen, continue calibration on the southern sensors. The rest of you, check your tablets for your assignments." He nodded and let us go. As people left, I heard bits of talk about pressure readings, equipment checks, and shift times. Even after such a weird briefing, they were just regular oil workers doing their jobs. Michael tapped my shoulder. "Ready for the tour?" I followed him through more hallways to an elevator. He swiped his key card and we went down. "So," I said as the elevator hummed downward. "A pocket of exception." Michael sighed. "Look, I know how it sounds, but weird stuff happens here. You follow the rules, you stay safe." "What kind of weird stuff?" The elevator stopped and Michael stepped out without answering. We entered a massive open area filled with drilling equipment. The production floor. It looked like any high-end offshore operation. Control stations, monitoring screens, heavy machinery. Seeing stuff I recognized felt almost comforting after all the weird things we'd seen. "This is East Production," Michael said. "One of 4 main drilling platforms. Your station is over here." He took me to a control panel that looked over the main drill shaft. The equipment was high-tech, but worked on principles I totally got. Pressure gauges, temperature monitors, torque readings. All stuff I knew well. "Your job is straightforward," Michael said. "Monitor these systems, maintain optimal drilling parameters, report any anomalies to me or Robert directly." I ran my hands over the controls, feeling at home for the first time since arriving. "What's our current depth?" 12,342 meters and descending. I looked up sharply. That's beyond what should be possible with current technology." Michael's expression didn't change. "Like Robert said, pocket of exception." He showed me the modified safety protocols next. Extra emergency shutoffs, redundant monitoring systems, and evacuation routes were marked on every wall. Each workstation had a direct line to security and medical teams. "This feels like overkill for an oil rig," I said. "Better to have it and not need it." Michael pointed to a series of screens showing underwater footage. "These monitor the area around the platform support structures. If you see anything unusual, hit the blue button." The feeds showed a normal ocean floor around the huge supports, but something about the picture quality felt wrong. It was too clear for underwater video at that depth. "What's powering these cameras? The resolution is incredible." "Proprietary technology," Michael said, his stock answer for anything unusual. We continued the tour through the production floor. I noticed small details that didn't add up. Equipment modifications that seemed designed to protect against something other than the usual risks. Unusual reinforcement on all water-adjacent barriers, and strange symbols marked on certain doors that didn't match any safety code I recognized. Around noon, Michael led me back to the mess hall for lunch. I spotted James at a table alone and joined him after grabbing a tray of food that looked like real restaurant food. "How's the tour?" James asked. "Informative," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Good equipment." James pushed his food around his plate. "They give you the speech about the pocket?" "Yeah. You believe that?" "Doesn't matter what I believe. Rules keep you alive." He lowered his voice. "Crew turnover is high here. People get transferred out suddenly, no explanation. Last month, 5 people gone overnight." I thought about the guards with assault rifles, the excessive security, the warnings about the water. Transferred where? James shrugged. "Company has facilities all over. Some volunteer for transfer after a few months. Others..." He trailed off, then changed subjects. "Food's good though, right?" After lunch, Michael kept showing me around until our shift ended. By evening, my head was full of everything I'd been told and seen. This place broke so many normal industry rules, and their explanations were crazy. A pocket of exception, where physics worked differently. It was like something from a sci-fi movie. Back in my room, I took a shower and changed. James wasn't around, so I had the place to myself. I went to the window, keeping an eye on the time. Looking at the dark ocean, I could see guards walking the outer walkways. All of them were looking at the water with their guns ready. They weren't protecting us from outside threats. They were watching for something coming from the ocean itself. I noticed something moving on the horizon. A boat with bright lights was heading toward us from the east. Not a supply ship. This one was smaller with equipment covering its deck. Probably a research vessel from the look of it. I watched it get closer, wondering what kind of research they'd be doing at this strange place. James returned as I stepped away from the window. "Saw a research ship coming in," I said casually. He glanced at the window, then back at me. "They come and go. Part of the operation." "What kind of operation needs both oil workers and scientific research?" James didn't answer. He got ready for bed in silence, and I did the same. That night, the pulsing sound from below seemed louder, more insistent. I lay awake for hours listening to it, thinking about the dark water and the guards staring at the waves. When morning came, I checked the window again. The research boat was completely gone, but as we headed to breakfast, I spotted new equipment being set up on the southern platform that wasn't there the day before. The day's shift rotation came faster than I expected. After only 3 days on the rig, I found myself stuck with the night shift on the east platform. The change felt sudden. 1 minute I was in the mess hall finishing lunch, the next I was watching the day crew leave while I settled in for 12 hours alone. Night on the east platform was different. The busy activity of the day turned into a weird quiet broken only by the mechanical sounds of the drilling equipment. With most of the crew gone, the huge production floor felt even bigger, my footsteps bouncing through empty space as I made my rounds. I spent the first few hours checking pressure readings and watching equipment status. The numbers stayed annoyingly steady, even though we were drilling incredibly deep. According to the logs, we'd reached 12,358 meters, impossible by normal standards. Every time I thought about that depth, my mind went back to Michael's strange explanation. Pocket of exception. The night dragged on forever. At 2 a.m., I walked a loop around the platform interior, writing down maintenance checks and looking for any problems. Being alone gave me time to think about everything I'd seen since arriving. The heavy security, the strange darkness in the water, and the new equipment on the southern platform that nobody would talk about. By 3 a.m., the silence felt thick. I went back to my monitoring station and poured another cup of coffee from my thermos. The taste was better than it had any right to be on an offshore rig. I wrote down the hourly readings and noticed we'd gone down another few meters. The drilling kept going without stopping, a constant push into whatever was beneath. At exactly 3:17 a.m., human screams broke through the mechanical noise of the rig. I jumped up, knocking my coffee across the desk. The screams came again, raw and terrified, from the lower deck. I grabbed my radio. "This is Wilson on East Production. Screams coming from lower deck. Anyone copy?" The radio crackled with static before Robert's voice answered, "All personnel remain at stations. Security responding." My hand paused on the radio. The screaming continued, now mixed with shouting. Standard protocol said to stay put during an emergency, unless directly ordered to help. I headed for the stairs. Taking them 2 at a time, I raced down to the lower deck where the outside walkway went around the platform. The screams got louder as I pushed through the heavy door to the outside. The night air hit me like a wall, damp and really cold. The scene on the deck stopped me cold. 3 security guards were around a worker near the railing. I recognized him as Marcus, one of the roughnecks from the drilling team. He was on his back, clawing at the metal deck, his face twisted in terror. 2 guards held his arms, trying to pull him away from the railing, while a third aimed what looked like a harpoon gun at the water. "Hold him!" one shouted over the wind. Marcus's body got yanked toward the ocean so hard that the guard stumbled back. His boots scraped across the deck, leaving long marks in the metal. The guards pulled against whatever had grabbed him, their faces showing how much they were struggling. "What's happening?" I called, moving to help. One guard turned to me. "Get back inside." Before I could respond, the guard with the harpoon fired into the water. The projectile hit the water with a splash. The water around where it hit started to bubble and churn, with a dark mass moving underneath. Not a shark or any sea animal I'd ever seen, just something darker in the already dark water. Marcus screamed again, his body jerked hard, and one guard lost his grip. The remaining guard couldn't hold him alone. Marcus slid toward the railing like he suddenly weighed nothing. With one last hard pull, his body lifted completely off the deck and went over the edge. He went into the water without a splash, like the surface just took him in. Then nothing. The churning stopped. The water went flat and calm, like nothing had happened. "Man overboard," the guard shouted into his radio. "East platform, lower deck." More security people showed up in seconds. Then Robert ran up next to me out of breath. "Get inside," he ordered, his voice flat and cold. "Lockdown protocols are now in effect." I couldn't move. What just took him? That wasn't normal. "Inside, now." Robert grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door. "All personnel, return to quarters immediately. This is not a drill." The PA system carried his command throughout the rig. Guards stood at different spots, making sure everyone headed to the living areas. As they moved us through the hallways, I heard bits of radio chatter, search teams getting together, boats being lowered, areas marked for sweep patterns. When I got to my room, James was already there, fully dressed, and sitting on his bed. He didn't look surprised at all about the lockdown. "What happened?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "A guy named Marcus got pulled overboard by something in the water." I paced across our small room. They couldn't hold him. It was like he was being dragged by a fishing line, but there was nothing there to see. James closed his eyes briefly. "Shit," he whispered. "Not another one." "Another one?" I stopped pacing. "This has happened before?" He glanced at the corners of the room, then at the ceiling. "We can't talk about this, not here." The warning in his eyes was clear. We sat in tense silence for hours, waiting. The lockdown stayed in effect with regular announcements telling all non-essential personnel to stay in quarters. At 7:43 a.m., the PA system started up again. "Attention all personnel. Lockdown protocols have been lifted. Day shift may proceed to normal duties. Night shift will remain on extended duty until further notice." James stood up. "They found him," he said flatly. "How do you know?" "They always do." He headed for the door. "Come on, breakfast." The mess hall was filled with nervous energy. People lowered their voices to whispers whenever someone new walked in. Robert showed up after most everyone had gathered and went to the front of the room. "Attention," he called. The room went silent. At 0317 hours, crew member Marcus Haynes suffered an epileptic seizure while working on the east platform. During the medical event, he fell overboard. After an extensive search operation, Mr. Haynes was recovered approximately 2 miles from the installation. He is alive and receiving medical attention. He will be transferred to a mainland hospital later today. I nearly choked on my coffee. Epileptic seizure. That wasn't remotely close to what I'd witnessed. I looked around the room, trying to see if anyone else was questioning this obvious lie. Most faces remained carefully blank, eyes fixed on their food. "Normal operations will resume immediately," Robert continued. "Additional safety briefings regarding proper railing protocols will be scheduled. That is all." As soon as Robert left, the low murmur of conversation resumed. I spotted Michael and David at a nearby table and joined them, James following close behind. "That's not what happened," I said without preamble. "I saw the whole thing. Something pulled Marcus into the water. He was dragged across the deck by some kind of force." James kicked my shin hard under the table. Michael and David exchanged a look. "Wilson," Michael said quietly, shaking his head. "Marcus had a seizure, lost his balance, fell in. That's what happened." "But the water was moving," I insisted. "There was something in it. The guard even fired a harpoon. Do you want to be transferred?" David cut in, his voice barely audible. "Because this is how you get transferred. Or worse." The table fell silent. Their faces told me everything I needed to know. They had seen similar things before, things that were immediately denied and covered up. After breakfast, Robert stopped me in the corridor. "Wilson, a word." He led me to a small meeting room and closed the door. "I'm reassigning you to the western platform," he said. "Effective immediately. The western platform, as far from the incident site as possible." "Why?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "We need your expertise there." His face gave away nothing. "Report to Supervisor Jensen at 1400 hours. He'll brief you on your duties. What about what I saw last night? We both know that wasn't a seizure. Robert's expression hardened. What you think you saw was distorted by darkness, distance, and the stress of an emergency situation. The medical team has confirmed an epileptic event. And the guards? The harpoon gun? The thing in the water? There were no guards present when Marcus fell. There was no weapon discharged. You are misremembering events due to stress. He leaned closer. This is your first and final warning, Wilson. The official report states that Marcus Haynes had a seizure and fell overboard. Any alternative narrative will be considered a violation of your non-disclosure agreement, resulting in immediate termination and possible legal action. The threat hung between us. Do I make myself clear? Robert asked. Crystal, I replied. Good, Western platform, 1400 hours. He opened the door. Enjoy your breakfast. I went back to my room to shower and change. Before reporting to the Western platform, I took a detour past the medical bay, saying I had a headache. Through the small window in the door, I saw Marcus lying on a bed, his eyes open but completely empty, staring at the ceiling. His body wasn't moving except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. A medical team in protective gear surrounded him, taking samples and readings. One of them spotted me and moved quickly to the door. This area is restricted, she said, blocking my view. Medical needs? Headache, I said, but I can come back later. Level 1 medical station is on the residence floor. This is research medical only. She waited until I turned and walked away. Research medical, not regular medical care. Whatever had happened to Marcus, they weren't treating him. They were studying him. At 2 p.m., I reported to the Western platform as ordered. The supervisor briefed me on monitoring duties identical to those I'd performed on the East platform. The monitors showed the same impossibly deep drilling operation, the same suspiciously steady pressure readings. As I settled into my new station, I looked out at the water surrounding the Western platform. From this vantage point, I could see almost the entire rig. In the distance, a helicopter descended onto the landing pad. Medical personnel wheeled a gurney toward it, a still form strapped down under a sheet. Marcus being transferred to a mainland hospital, but the helicopter didn't lift off in the direction of the mainland. It turned and headed out to sea, toward the horizon where I'd seen the research vessel disappear. 3 days after Marcus's incident, the rig had changed. It wasn't anything obvious at first. The same equipment made noise. The same fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The same taste of industrial coffee lingered in the break rooms. But underneath the routine, something was different. I first noticed it when a helicopter arrived early on the second morning. 4 men stepped out onto the landing pad, moving like military units I'd seen during security trainings at previous jobs. Unlike the regular guards who nodded at passing workers, these men looked around with cold assessment. They carried sidearms openly and spoke only to each other through small earpieces rather than the standard radios. By the 3rd day, the East platform crew had been gutted. At least 8 workers I'd seen regularly in the mess hall were gone, including everyone who had been on shift with Marcus that night. "Where's Alvarez?" I asked Michael as we crossed paths in a corridor. Alvarez had worked the console next to Marcus. Michael's eyes darted to a nearby security camera before answering. "Emergency transfer, family issue. And Chen? Rodriguez?" 2 more East platform workers I hadn't seen since the incident. "Same thing. Transfers happen." He picked up his pace, clearly wanting to end the conversation. After my shift on the Western platform ended, I made a decision. The headache that had been building behind my eyes gave me a perfect excuse. I walked to the medical bay on sea level, swiped my key card at the door, and pressed the intercom button. "Medical. State your purpose." A woman answered. "Thomas Wilson. I've got a headache that won't go away." The door buzzed open. Inside, the front area looked like a standard medical facility. Examination tables, supply cabinets, a desk where a nurse in scrubs looked up at me. "What seems to be the problem?" she asked. "Headache started this morning. getting worse. She gestured to an exam table. "Have a seat. I'll get you something for that." As she turned to a medicine cabinet, I glanced around the room. A second door stood partially open at the back of the medical bay. Through the gap, I could make out what looked like a hospital bed with restraints. "Mind if I use the bathroom first?" I asked casually. "Through there." She pointed to a door on the right without looking up. I waited until she was busy with the medication cabinet, then quickly went across the room to the partially open door. 3 quick steps and I was through it. The space beyond was nothing like the front area. Bright white lights lit up equipment I didn't recognize, monitors with weird readouts, machines that made a low buzz, and at the center, a hospital bed where Marcus lay strapped down. His eyes were open, looking at the ceiling without blinking. They didn't look right. The pupils were super dilated, making his eyes look almost completely black. His skin had a strange, waxy look, and I could see dark lines under the skin that were probably veins. A woman in a white lab coat stood beside the bed, drawing blood from Marcus's arm. She wrote notes on a tablet with her free hand, totally focused on her work until she noticed me and looked up. Her eyes got wide. "This area is restricted." She moved to block my view. "You need to leave immediately." The nurse showed up behind me. "Sir, the bathroom is the other door. This area needs different clearance." "Sorry, wrong door," I said, trying to look appropriately confused while taking one last look at Marcus. His body seemed wrong somehow, too still, as if he wasn't breathing naturally. The nurse held my arm tight. "This way, please." Back in the exam area, she handed me 2 white pills and a cup of water. "Take these now. I'll give you more to take later if needed." I swallowed the pills, watching as the researcher in the other room hit what looked like an alarm button on her desk. "You should return to your quarters and rest," the nurse said, already guiding me toward the exit. In the corridor, I walked quickly toward the residential section, processing what I'd just seen. Marcus wasn't being treated. He was being studied. And there was something seriously wrong with him beyond a near drowning. That evening, I waited for James to return to our quarters. When he finally came through the door, I didn't waste time. "We need to talk about Marcus," I said. James froze, glancing around the room before answering. "I don't know what you mean." "I saw him today, in the medical bay. He's still here, strapped to a bed like a lab rat." James crossed to the sink and turned the water on full blast. He motioned me closer. "Not here," he whispered under the noise of the running water. "They listen." "Who listens?" "Everyone." His eyes darted upward. "Marcus isn't the first, okay? There have been 3 others in the past year." 3 others pulled into the water? I kept my voice low. He nodded. Company calls them accidents or medical emergencies, but they were taken just like Marcus. By what? I don't know. The fear in his eyes seemed genuine. Nobody knows, or nobody who talks about it stays around long. And the others? What happened to them after? They never came back to the rig. James shut off the water abruptly. "That's all I'm saying. We should go to dinner." The mess hall felt different that night. Conversations seemed forced, with long pauses and careful word choices. The new security personnel sat at a table by themselves, watching everyone. Nobody mentioned Marcus or the other missing workers. That night I lay in bed, listening to the strange, pulsing sound from below the rig. It seemed stronger than before, more insistent. James fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and even. I looked up at the ceiling, thinking about Marcus's black eyes and the researcher drawing his blood. Morning came after a restless night. I sat up, reaching for my work boots beside the bed. As I picked up the left boot, something fell out. A small piece of paper folded tightly. I glanced at James, still asleep, before unfolding it. The handwriting was cramped but clear. Research level B3, midnight. Come alone. I quickly refolded the note and tucked it into my pocket. Who had left it? And how had they gotten into our quarters without either of us noticing? My shift that day was on the western platform watching underwater cameras and drilling readings. Around midday, movement on one of the camera feeds caught my attention. The feed showed the ocean floor near the main support structures, lit dimly by the rig's outside lights. Something moved across the screen, not randomly like ocean currents, but with purpose. I followed it across 3 different camera angles as it circled one of the support columns. Whatever it was looked hard to make out, darker than the surrounding water, with what looked like multiple arms or tentacles. David walked past my station, stopping when he saw what had caught my eye. "What's that?" I asked, pointing to the shape. His face showed nothing. "Where?" "Right there," I pointed as the thing moved into view on another camera. "That movement pattern isn't like any marine life I've ever seen." Without a word, David reached over and tapped a few keys. The screen changed to a different view where everything looked normal. "System diagnostic," he said loudly, pulling out his radio. "Control, this is Cohen. Running diagnostic sweep on Western platform cameras 7 through 12. Temporary feed interruption." "Copy that," came the reply. "Authorized." He turned to me with a flat expression. "Sometimes the underwater feeds get interference. Nothing to worry about." "That wasn't interference," I said. "Something was moving down there. Just tricks of light in the water. Happens all the time." He walked away but positioned himself at a nearby console where he could watch what I was doing. I tried to bring back the original feed, but my access had been restricted. For the rest of my shift, I went through the motions of checking gauges and entering numbers, my mind on the note in my pocket. Research level B3. I'd never seen it on any of the facility maps. It had to be in a restricted area, probably requiring higher clearance than I had. I would need to find it without being caught by security that was watching everything more closely now. As my shift ended, I thought about the risks. Whatever was happening on this rig went beyond unusual drilling operations or workplace accidents. People were being taken by something in the water, and instead of stopping it, the company was studying it. I decided I would go to B3 at midnight. The truth was worth the risk. I had to face facts. On this rig, knowing what was really going on could save your life. It could be the difference between staying alive and becoming the next person strapped to a bed with dark, empty eyes. A boom woke me up suddenly. My nightstand clock said 2:37 a.m. The alarm screamed for 6 seconds before it cut off, leaving everything weirdly quiet. James wasn't in his bed. I pulled on my pants and stuffed my feet into my boots without tying them. The door to our room opened with a hiss when I stepped into the hallway. The emergency lights were on, making everything look red and hard to see. The hallway was empty. No security guards running to check things out. No workers coming out of their rooms to look. Just silence when there should have been chaos. I headed toward where the explosion came from, following the smell of smoke and something else. Something like metal and wet. When I turned the corner toward the B-section stairs, I saw him. William sat against the wall, one hand on his neck. Blood leaked through his fingers, running down his arm and making a puddle on the floor. His eyes got big when he saw me. "Wilson," he gasped, his voice barely audible. "Help me up." I rushed to his side to see how bad it was. He had a gunshot wound in his neck just above the collarbone. Blood was pouring out fast. "We need to get you to medical," I said, reaching for my radio before realizing I'd left it in my quarters. William grabbed my arm. He was really strong for someone bleeding so much. He stared at me, looking desperate. "No," he whispered. "They did this. Listen to me." I leaned closer as his voice weakened. "They're not drilling for oil," William said, each word requiring visible effort. "They're drilling into it. The boundary. It's coming through." Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. I tried to apply pressure to the wound, but he pushed my hand away. "We're lab rats," he continued, his breathing becoming more labored. "Get away from..." His body suddenly stiffened. A violent convulsion shook him from head to toe. His grip on my arm tightened painfully, then released as his body went slack. His eyes stayed open, staring at the ceiling, seeing nothing. Footsteps bounced from the corridor to my right. Heavy, purposeful steps of multiple people moving quickly. I looked around frantically. The stairwell door was too far. They'd see me before I reached it. I spotted a small door marked Supply about 10 feet away. I moved as quietly as possible, opened it, and slipped inside just as the footsteps rounded the corner. The closet was narrow and dark, filled with cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment. Through a small crack where the door didn't quite close properly, I could see William's body and the growing pool of blood around him. Robert came into view, with 2 guards with weapons drawn on either side. They approached William's body cautiously. One guard checked for a pulse, then shook his head. Robert pulled out his radio. "Subject W compromised," he said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Containment breach possible. Prepare Unit 7. Subject W, not William. Subject W." One guard took photographs of the scene while the other retrieved something from a case he carried. They turned William's head to the side, showing the gunshot wound. The guard leaned down with what looked like a syringe and injected something directly into the wound. "Full cleanup protocol," Robert instructed. "I want this corridor sterile by morning briefing." The guards nodded, then lifted William's body between them. His arms hung limp, head lolling backward as they carried him away. Robert followed, speaking quietly into his radio. I couldn't make out the words. I waited until the footsteps faded completely before easing the door open. The hallway was empty again, with only the pool of blood as evidence that William had ever been there. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures, making sure to capture the blood pattern and location near the B-section stairwell. After taking the photos, I went back to my quarters, wondering about so many things. What boundary was William talking about? What did containment breach mean? And why would Robert call him Subject W instead of his name? I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for any unusual sounds. James never returned to our quarters. Morning came with no further incidents. I showered and dressed without thinking much, still stuck on William's final words. When I entered the hallway to head to breakfast, I noticed something right away. The blood was gone. Not just cleaned up, but completely absent. The floor looked shiny as if freshly polished, without even a hint of cleaning solution smell. The mess hall was full of normal morning activity. Workers ate breakfast and talked about shift rotations as if nothing had happened. I saw Michael and David at their usual table and joined them, looking around for any sign of James. "Either of you see James this morning?" I asked casually. Michael shook his head. "Not since yesterday's shift." David didn't look up from his coffee. The daily briefing started at 7:30 a.m. sharp, with Robert standing at the front of the room looking as composed as ever. He went through the standard updates, production numbers, maintenance schedules, safety reminders, without a single mention of an explosion, an alarm, or a death. When he opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand. The room went quieter than usual. "Has anyone seen William today?" I asked, watching Robert's face carefully. He wasn't at breakfast. Robert's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "There is no personnel by that name on this rig," he replied evenly. "Perhaps you were dreaming." Several workers moved around uncomfortably in their seats. Michael looked hard at the table. David all of a sudden got super focused on a loose thread on his sleeve. "I saw him last night," I pressed, "near the B-section stairwell." Robert looked at me coldly. "Mr. Wilson, I'm concerned about your mental state. The isolation of rig life can cause stress-induced hallucinations in some people. Maybe you should go to the medical bay for an evaluation." He turned away from me, moving on to the next question as if my concerns were meaningless. But I noticed how he looked around the room, checking who seemed uncomfortable at the exchange. After the briefing, I headed to my assigned station on the western platform. As I passed through security, I noticed 3 new guards I hadn't seen before. They watched me with open suspicion. Throughout my shift, I couldn't shake William's words from my mind. They're not drilling for oil. They're drilling into it. The boundary. Each pressure reading I logged, each gauge I monitored seemed to take on new significance. What exactly was I helping them drill into? I tried to focus on my work, but my thoughts kept returning to William bleeding out on the floor, to Robert's cold denial, to Subject W and Unit 7. I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something was happening on this rig that went far beyond oil extraction. Something worth killing for. And as I watched the numbers on my monitors climb steadily higher as we drilled deeper into whatever lay beneath us, I wondered how many others had discovered the truth before me, and what had happened to them afterward. 1 week went by since William's death without anyone officially saying it happened. The bloodstain near the B-section stairwell was gone, cleaned away so completely it was like it never existed. No memorial service, no moment of silence, not even a mention in the daily briefings. William had been erased. The schedule rotations came out Monday morning, and I saw my name move to the southern platform. I looked up from the tablet to see Robert watching me from across the mess hall, his face blank. "Southern platform?" I asked Michael when he sat down with his breakfast tray. "What's down there?" Michael chewed his eggs slowly, buying time. "Newer equipment? Different monitoring parameters? Is that where they took the new machinery I saw arriving last week?" He looked at the nearest security camera. "Just follow protocols and you'll be fine." That was all anyone would tell me. Even David, who usually supplied at least minimal information, suddenly had pressing duties elsewhere whenever I approached. James hadn't returned to our quarters since the night William died. His bunk remained untouched, his few personal items still in place, but he'd simply vanished. When my shift began that evening, a security escort walked me to the southern platform for the standard orientation that Robert had ordered. We passed through 3 separate security checkpoints, each requiring higher clearance than the last. "Your temporary access code," the guard said, handing me a black keycard. "Valid only during assigned shifts. Surrender it immediately after your 12 hours. The southern platform wasn't just another drilling section. It was a completely different operation. The space was bigger than 2 basketball courts, with a huge circular machine that went through the floor. It didn't look like normal drilling equipment. This machine had lots of see-through tubes filled with glowing blue liquid that moved in time with the weird sound I'd been hearing since I got here. The security guard pointed to a monitoring station on a raised platform overlooking the main floor. "You'll be tracking pressure readings and logging any problems. Don't leave this station no matter what. Check the manual for emergency procedures." Then he left. The heavy door closed behind him with a hiss, and I was alone with the buzzing equipment and the steady rhythm of the pulsing blue liquid. The monitoring station had 6 screens showing different readings. The middle screen showed a depth counter at 13,487 meters, way deeper than what I'd seen on the eastern platform. Another screen showed what looked like geological layers, but the bottom levels had weird formations I'd never seen in any rock before. Hours went by without anything happening as I recorded the readings and watched the depth counter slowly tick up. Nobody came by or called in, unlike other parts of the rig where workers sometimes passed through. I felt really alone. All I could hear was the noise of the machines and that steady pulsing from below. At 2:17 a.m., something weird happened. The lights flickered for a moment, going dim before coming back on. I checked the power readings. Nothing showed up as wrong. Odd, but not scary yet. 10 minutes later, it happened again. This time, the screens showed static patterns. The depth counter went crazy, jumping to 15,134 meters for a split second, before going back to 13,489. I reached for the radio to report the problem when I noticed something by the door. Water was coming in under the sealed entrance, a thin, oily puddle that spread across the metal floor in a strange way. Instead of flowing down toward the drain grates like it should, it seemed to move on its own, gathering into a growing pool. This made no sense. We were at least 40 feet above the water, and the door had several seals to keep water out. I backed away, watching the puddle get bigger. The water started to rise upward about 4 feet tall. The lights flickered again, and in that moment when it was darker, the column shaped itself into something with a torso, arms, and a head. When the lights came back on, the water fell away, showing what was underneath. The thing had William's face, definitely his features, but on a body that wasn't human anymore. Its arms and legs were stretched out and skinny, bending in ways they shouldn't. Its skin was almost see-through, showing veins that glowed with the same blue light as the liquid in the drilling machine's tubes. I bumped into the railing of the monitoring platform. The creature stared at me with eyes like black holes that didn't reflect any light. It opened its mouth, showing rows of needle-like teeth in circles, but instead of attacking, it raised a webbed hand toward me. "Help!" The sound was barely recognizable as speech, a gurgling attempt at words pushed through vocal cords that were no longer designed for human language. Thomas. It knew my name. The thing with William's face knew who I was. "William?" I whispered. The creature jerked its head in what might have been a nod. "Not much time." Each word seemed to cause it physical pain. "They're letting in." I reached for the emergency button on the console behind me. The creature saw the movement and came at me fast. Its webbed hand shot out toward me, with fingers that were way too long and bent at weird angles. "Listen," it gargled, blue fluid dripping from its mouth. "Boundary. Breaking. They want—" I slammed my palm down on the emergency button. Alarms immediately blared throughout the platform. The creature pulled back, grabbing at what passed for ears, its mouth opening in a silent scream of pain. Within seconds, the door burst open. 4 security guards in special gear rushed in, carrying what looked like weapons but with wide barrel ends that had the same blue energy I'd seen in the creature's veins. "Containment breach! Target acquired!" one shouted into his radio. They aimed their weapons at the creature. It turned to look at me one last time, its face looking strangely human even with all its monster-like features. "Find others," it gurgled. Then the security team fired. The weapons didn't shoot bullets. Instead, they shot concentrated pulses of energy that hit the creature at the same time. It fell to the floor, its body shaking wildly, the blue glow in its veins flashing like a dying light bulb. 2 more personnel came in with what looked like a clear coffin. They quickly put the shaking creature inside and closed the lid. The shaking continued for several seconds before the creature went still, floating in a pale blue liquid that filled the container. Robert appeared in the doorway, staying calm even with all the chaos around him. He looked over the scene, spoke briefly into his radio, then walked up to me. I was still frozen against the railing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. "That was William," I said. He knew my name. He was trying to tell me something about a boundary. Robert's face stayed blank as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small case. From it, he took out a syringe filled with clear liquid. "Standard protocol requires a mandatory sedative following exposure to contamination," he said, his voice clinical and detached. "That thing had William's face," I insisted, the words tumbling out. He knew me. He was trying to communicate. What the hell is going on here? What are you people really drilling for? Robert nodded to someone behind me. Strong hands gripped my shoulders, holding me in place. I struggled, but the grip only tightened. "This will help you process the trauma," Robert said as he approached with the syringe. "When you wake up, we'll have a serious discussion about your future on this rig." I felt the needle stick into my neck, and something cold went through my body. The room started to get fuzzy. Before I passed out, I saw them rolling away the containment unit, with William's changed face against the clear wall, his black eyes still looking right at me. I opened my eyes to bright fluorescent lights overhead. The ceiling tiles were an off-white color, with small water stains in the corner. My head hurt with a dull ache that made even blinking painful. An IV line ran from my arm to a bag of clear fluid hanging beside the bed. "Welcome back, Mr. Wilson." Robert sat in a chair next to the bed holding a tablet. His face stayed blank, but his eyes followed everything I did. "How long?" I asked, my voice rough from disuse. 12 hours, give or take." He tapped something on his tablet. "You've been under observation since the incident on the southern platform." I tried to sit up, but my muscles felt weak and uncooperative. "William was not present during your episode," Robert cut in smoothly. "You experienced what our medical team calls a stress-induced hallucination, not uncommon in this environment, particularly for those unaccustomed to the isolation." "That wasn't a hallucination," I said, struggling to a sitting position. "William was there. He knew my name. He was trying to tell me something about a boundary breaking." Robert's face changed. His eyes got a little tighter and narrower. He put down his tablet and leaned forward. "I see." He paused, studying me. "In that case, there are some things you need to understand." A doctor came in, checked my vitals, and took out the IV. She gave me clean clothes and left without saying anything. Robert stood by the door while I got dressed. He had his back turned, but looked ready for anything. "Follow me," he said when I finished. We left the infirmary and walked through corridors I hadn't seen before. The security here was tighter. Cameras watched us as we moved, and guards stood at key intersections wearing tactical gear and holding weapons better than the standard ones. Each door needed Robert's badge and a fingerprint scan. We went down in an elevator that required both Robert's keycard and a code typed into a keypad. The digital display showed we were heading to level B4. "B4 isn't on any of the facility maps," I said. Robert didn't respond. The elevator opened to a clean white hallway that looked more like a research facility than an oil rig. Robert took me to a conference room with a long table and several chairs. A large screen covered one wall showing the company logo. "Wait here," he instructed, then left. I sat alone for almost 10 minutes checking out the room. Everything looked expensive and high-tech, way more than any oil operation would put in a temporary facility. The table's surface was a touch screen. The walls had special sound-blocking panels that would stop anyone from listening in. Small cameras sat in each corner of the ceiling. The door opened, and a woman walked in. She looked to be in her early 50s with short dark hair. She wore a business suit that seemed weird to see on an offshore rig. Her handshake was firm and quick. "Thomas Wilson," she said, taking a seat across from me. "I'm Dr. Catherine Weiss, head of Project Rift. I understand you've had an enlightening experience." Robert entered behind her, taking a position near the door. Dr. Catherine touched the table surface, and the screen on the wall changed to show a digital cross-section of the rig and the ocean floor beneath it. "Let me be direct, Mr. Wilson. Oceanic Deep-Sea Drilling is not an oil company, at least not primarily. What we're doing here goes far beyond resource extraction." She zoomed in on the image, highlighting an area deep beneath the seabed. 15 years ago, our sonar mapping detected an anomaly in this location, something that shouldn't exist according to known geology. The display changed to show a series of readings, sonar scans, energy signatures, and data I couldn't interpret. "What we found," she continued, "was a thin spot in the fabric of reality. A location where the boundary between our dimension and another has worn dangerously thin." I stared at the screen, processing her words. "You're not drilling for oil. You're drilling into another dimension?" "We're studying the boundary," she corrected. "Taking samples, monitoring fluctuations, learning what exists on the other side and how it interacts with our world." "And the people who go missing? Marcus? William?" I asked. Dr. Catherine's face looked cold and professional. "Exposure incidents. The boundary leaks, Mr. Wilson. Or you could say that things from the other side sometimes reach through." People who touch this material start to change. Their bodies begin to take on qualities from the other dimension. She tapped the screen again, showing a video. I recognized the containment room I'd seen when looking for Marcus. Dozens of clear tanks lined the walls, each with a floating person inside. Some looked mostly human, others... "These are our current research subjects," Dr. Catherine said. "Former employees who have begun the transformation process. We study them to understand the nature of the change and how to potentially control or reverse it." One of the tanks held Marcus, his eyes open and aware, even though his body was partly changed. Another contained what I was now sure had been William, the same distorted figure I'd seen on the southern platform. "William didn't die from a gunshot wound," I said, the pieces connecting in my mind. "Correct," Dr. Catherine replied. "William was an early-stage transformation case who escaped containment during transport. Security attempted to recapture him non-lethally, but in his confused state, he became violent. What you encountered on the southern platform was William after completing the next phase of transformation." It freaked me out how casually she talked about it, like she was discussing lab rats instead of people I'd worked with. "You're experimenting on them," I said, unable to keep the disgust from my voice. "We're learning from them," she corrected. "The potential applications of this discovery are beyond calculation, Mr. Wilson. Imagine materials with properties that defy our physics. Medical applications that could revolutionize treatment of currently incurable conditions. Defense technologies that would render conventional weapons obsolete." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Which brings me to the purpose of this conversation. You now know the truth about our operation. That leaves us with limited options." Robert moved slightly by the door, letting everyone know he was still there. "Option 1, Dr. Catherine continued. You join the research team with increased clearance and compensation. Your engineering expertise would be valuable, and you've already demonstrated remarkable adaptability." "And option 2? I asked, already guessing the answer. "Memory modification and transfer. You'd be reassigned to one of our conventional drilling operations with no recollection of the past 2 weeks. Her expression made it clear which option she preferred. "You have potential, Thomas. I'd hate to waste it." My mind raced. Either choice was dangerous. If I refused to join them, I doubted I'd simply be allowed to leave with my memory wiped. More likely, I'd end up in one of those tanks, but agreeing too readily might raise suspicion. "This is a lot to process," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I need time to think." Dr. Catherine looked me over, then nodded. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide. In the meantime, your clearance has been temporarily upgraded to allow access to Level B2. Feel free to review some of our non-classified research. It might help inform your decision." She stood up. "One more thing, Mr. Wilson. Any attempt to talk to the outside world about what you've learned will be caught and dealt with, for everyone's safety." Robert took me back to my quarters, which seemed weirdly normal after everything. The bed, desk, and window felt like they belonged to a different reality. One where oil rigs were just oil rigs and people didn't turn into monsters. James's bunk was still empty and untouched. I lay on my bed for hours, thinking about everything. The rig, the drilling operation, the disappearances. It all started to make sense now. They'd found a weak spot between dimensions and were messing with it, not caring what might come through, or who might be changed by it. I needed to get word out. Documentation, evidence, something real that would expose what was happening here. At 1:47 a.m., I left my quarters. The B2 access Dr. Catherine mentioned might be my only chance. The hallways were mostly empty, with skeleton crews handling night shifts. I nodded to the few workers I passed, trying to look normal as I headed to the communications center on level B2. My temporary clearance worked on the door. Inside, banks of equipment made a low, buzzing sound. Satellite communication arrays, radio systems, computer terminals, all the tech needed to stay in touch with the outside world from this isolated spot. I sat at a terminal and began typing an emergency message, planning to send it to the Coast Guard and several news outlets at the same time. But when I tried to connect to the external network, a message popped up. All outgoing communications routed through ODSD secure servers for security verification. Please wait for transmission approval. Of course, they wouldn't leave an open channel that could expose them. I needed another plan. Instead, I got into the internal network. My engineering credentials let me look through most of the standard systems. I searched for research files, hoping to find something I could download as evidence. To my surprise, many files were open to me. Video logs of early encounters with the Boundary material, medical records of transformation cases, papers on practical uses of dimensional technology. I connected my phone to the terminal and started downloading everything I could find, watching the progress bar move forward super slowly. A noise in the hallway outside made me stop. I unplugged my phone, put it in my pocket, and quickly closed the files on the terminal. I made it look like I was checking equipment logs, something a senior engineer might normally do, just as the door opened. A security guard looked in, and his eyes got narrow when he saw me. "Working late, Mr. Wilson?" I nodded, trying to appear calm. "Just familiarizing myself with the systems. Dr. Catherine upgraded my clearance." He checked something on his tablet, then nodded reluctantly. "The night shift supervisor should be notified when personnel access comms after hours." "Sorry, first time down here. I'll remember that." He gave me a final suspicious look before leaving. I waited 5 minutes, then left the communications center. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, loaded with evidence that could expose the entire operation, if I could get off this rig alive. The walk back to my quarters seemed longer, with security possibly hiding in every corner. I took a slightly different route, wanting to be less predictable. As I turned down the final corridor, I saw someone standing in the shadows near my door. I slowed my pace, considering whether to turn around. Then the person stepped into the light. James stood there, looking at me with a blank face. His eyes dropped to my pocket, where my phone was partially visible, then back to my face. He said nothing, but the silent message was clear. He knew. James and I stood in the hallway, locked in a silent standoff. His eyes stayed fixed on the phone in my pocket, then moved back up to my face. I couldn't read his expression beyond the obvious. He knew what I'd done. "We should talk inside," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. If James really was security, following him into our isolated quarters might be walking into a trap. But standing in the hallway with incriminating evidence in my pocket wasn't smart either. I nodded and followed him through the door. Once inside, James looked around the corners of the room, then turned the sink faucet on full blast. The sound of running water filled the small space. "They have microphones everywhere," he said quietly, "but not in the plumbing." I kept my distance, back against the wall. "Are you going to report me?" James shook his head. "Not yet. What did you find in the comms center?" I weighed my options. James had been missing since William's death, only to reappear now when I'd gathered evidence. But I needed information, and possibly an ally. Research files, videos, medical records of the transformations. I didn't mention the download to my phone. They're not drilling for oil. They're studying something coming through from another dimension. I know. James sat on his bunk, suddenly looking exhausted. "I've known for 3 months." "How much do you know about what they're doing to those people?" "Enough." He rubbed his face. "The research subjects, the tanks, the transformation process." I thought about the supply schedule I'd memorized during my orientation. "The helicopter comes in 2 days. Supply run from the mainland." James looked up sharply. "Don't even think about it. Robert's people watch those transfers like hawks. Anyone trying to board without clearance would be stopped immediately." "I have temporary upgraded clearance," I reminded him, "from Dr. Catherine. To level B2, The helipad requires B1 or higher. I paced the small room, thinking, I need to see more. I need to understand what's really happening here. You should just take their offer, James said, his voice hollow. Join the research team. That's the only way you survive this. Like the others survived? Like William? I leaned closer, keeping my voice under the sound of the water. I'm getting off this rig, with proof of what they're doing. James stared at me for a while, then nodded once. Get some sleep. We'll talk more tomorrow. I lay on my bunk for hours, unable to sleep, planning my next moves. I needed to access the lower levels, find solid evidence beyond the files I'd already downloaded, and figure out how to get on that helicopter. My mind raced with possibilities and dangers until I finally passed out from exhaustion. Morning came too quickly. The daily briefing was run by Robert, who watched me extra closely. Dr. Catherine wasn't there, but it felt planned rather than random. Throughout the meeting, I noticed James staying on the opposite side of the room, carefully avoiding eye contact. After the briefing, I tested my new clearance by heading toward the B3 research level. The elevator accepted my temporary credentials, taking me deeper beneath the rig than I'd been before. The doors opened to a clean white hallway with multiple security doors. Most needed higher clearance than mine, but one labeled Observation accepted my badge. Inside was a small room with a large observation window looking over a huge laboratory space. Below, at least 24 clear containment tanks lined the walls, each filled with pale blue liquid, and floating in each tank was a human, or what had once been human. Some looked mostly normal, with only subtle changes. Dark veins under pale skin, slightly longer fingers, eyes that had begun to change into those black, empty holes. Others were in more advanced stages, their bodies twisted and changed like William's had been. A control panel in front of the window let me zoom in on individual tanks. I focused on one in the corner and my stomach dropped. Marcus floated inside, his transformation worse than when I'd seen him in the medical bay. His limbs had grown longer, joints bending at weird angles. His skin had become nearly see-through, showing dark veins pulsing underneath. But his eyes, they were fully aware now, alert and following the movements of the lab technicians below. As I watched, a technician approached Marcus's tank with some kind of testing device. Marcus immediately pressed his hands against the glass, his mouth moving like he was begging. The technician ignored him, taking readings from a panel on the side of the tank before moving on. I moved the view to other tanks. Some people floated limply, looking unconscious or maybe already dead. Others moved constantly, pushing against their tanks, mouths open in silent screams. One caught my attention, a figure so changed that barely anything human remained except the eyes, which looked straight at the observation window like it knew I was watching. A door at the end of the observation room led to a small archive. Here, my clearance gave me access to physical records, older research notes and paperwork not yet digitized. I quickly looked through filing cabinets until I found what I needed. The project's original mission plans. The documents went back nearly 30 years, way before the rig was built. The company had found the dimensional weakness during a regular geological survey. Initial drilling showed weird readings, followed by the first material exposure incident that changed 2 workers. Instead of stopping operations, they expanded them, building the specialized rig to continue research. Page after page showed how they learned about the transformative properties of exposure. One document listed potential uses: bioweapons that could change enemy fighters, enhanced soldiers with abilities beyond human limits, or industrial applications using materials with properties that broke the laws of physics. I took pictures of as many documents as I could, adding to the evidence already on my phone. While I worked, I heard voices coming from the hallway outside. I quickly put the files back and left through a side door that connected back to the main hallway. I spent the rest of the day at my assigned station on the western platform, just going through the motions while thinking about everything I'd seen. The people in those tanks had been workers just like me. One wrong move, one moment of exposure, and they became research subjects, specimens to study rather than people to save. When my shift ended, I went back to my room to find James waiting. He'd turned on the shower this time, steam filling the room to cover our conversation. "You went to B3, he said. It wasn't a question. How did you know? James looked at me with a mix of frustration and giving up. Because it's my job to know. I was assigned to monitor you from the moment you arrived. My hand went to my pocket where my phone held the evidence I'd gathered. Don't, James said quickly. I'm not here to stop you. Then why are you here? He sat heavily on his bunk. My brother was on this rig 3 months ago, technical specialist, like David. He noticed the same things you did. The secrecy, the disappearances. Started asking questions. I could see where this was going. He was exposed. James nodded, looking upset but holding it together. They said it was an accident. Containment breach during a routine maintenance check. By the time I got transfer approval to come here, he was already in one of those tanks. Which one? I asked quietly. Tank 17, the one in the far corner. His voice faltered. He still recognizes me when I visit. At least, I think he does. Everything clicked into place. James's reluctance to talk, his disappearances, the warning note I'd received, it had all been leading to this moment. That's why you slipped me the note about B3, I said. You wanted me to see the truth. I wanted someone else to know what they're doing here. He looked up at me, his expression hardening with resolve. The helicopter arrives tomorrow at 800 for the supply transfer. If we're going to get you and that evidence off this rig, we need to create a distraction big enough that security will be too busy to stop you. We? I can't leave. They'd know I helped you, but I can make sure you get on that helicopter. James pulled out a small tablet and showed me a schematic of the rig. The primary power coupling for the drilling operation is here on level C1. If it fails catastrophically, emergency protocols will pull security from all non-essential areas to contain the situation. I studied the schematic. That's close to the boundary they're drilling into. Wouldn't that be dangerous? It won't damage the containment systems, just create enough chaos for you to reach the helipad. He pointed to another section. Security will evacuate all non-essential personnel to the upper levels. That's your window. What about you? James smiled bitterly. I'll be busy reporting a broken equipment that needs fixing right away. By the time they figure out what's happened, you'll be gone. We spent the next hour planning the details. James knew all the security protocols really well, including how to set off alarms without getting caught. I memorized the route to the helipad and the timing we'd need to make this work. As we finished, James looked at me hard. When you get out, make sure everyone knows, not just about the transformations, but about the people. My brother, William. All of them. I promise, I said. If there's a way to shut this down and help them, I'll find it. We slept in shifts that night, too wired to fully rest. Morning arrived with the same boring routine as always on the rig. Daily briefing, shift assignments, the constant noise of machinery. No one looking at us would have guessed what we planned to do. At 0735, I positioned myself near the research level elevator, pretending to check equipment readings. James had already disappeared toward the power couplings on C1. At exactly 0742, the lights blinked. 3 seconds later, alarms blared throughout the facility. Emergency in section C1. All security personnel report to containment response stations. Non-essential personnel evacuate to upper levels immediately. The automated message repeated on a loop as red emergency lights bathed the corridors. I joined a group of workers heading toward the upper levels, then broke away at a junction point using my clearance to access a maintenance ladder that would take me directly to the helipad level. Like James said, the security checkpoints were empty, with the guards called to handle the emergency below. I got to the upper deck right when the supply helicopter landed. Wind from the rotors blew across the helipad as ground crew rushed to unload supplies. In the confusion, I slipped into the line of technicians checking manifests. My upgraded clearance badge was enough to get me past the one guard left, who was paying more attention to the alarms than checking badges. The helicopter pilot was already getting ready to leave, wanting to get away from whatever emergency had set off the facility's alarms. I said I was escorting the technical equipment being sent back for mainland repairs, showing my engineering credentials. He nodded quickly, waving for me to get on board. I climbed in, my pulse racing as I sat down among the crates and equipment. Through the window, I could see more security staff showing up at the far end of the helipad, responding to the alert about me moving around without permission. The pilot got clearance to leave and the helicopter took off. As we went up, I saw someone come onto the helipad below, moving in jerky, weird ways. Even from up here, I could tell it was William's changed body, standing on the edge of the platform, face looking up at our helicopter. Those black, empty eyes stared at me like he knew exactly what he was doing. The radio crackled. "Supply helicopter Delta 3, this is Oceanic Deep Control. You are ordered to return immediately. Repeat, return to platform immediately." The pilot looked back at me, suddenly suspicious. "What's in those equipment cases you're escorting?" "Standard replacement parts," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing unusual." He looked at me for a moment before turning back to his controls. "Control, this is Delta 3. Returning as ordered." The helicopter turned sharply, heading back to the rig. As we went down, I felt a weird, tingly feeling in my fingertips that slowly moved up through my hands. I looked down and saw dark lines under the skin of my wrists, following my veins up my arms. It hit me hard. I'd been exposed, maybe in the research level, maybe earlier when I ran into William. It didn't matter when. What mattered was that I was already changing. The stuff on my phone, even if I got it out, would cost me by making me like those stuck in the tanks below. The tingly feeling got worse as we got close to the helipad. Guards stood ready, some holding the same weapons they used on William. At the edge of the platform, William's changed body was there, watching us land with those black, unblinking eyes. As the helicopter touched down, I felt the first painful cramp in my fingers as they started to stretch and grow.